He lived on the edge of a wide-open land where the mornings were quiet and the evenings were long. The ranchero woke up every day before the sun, not because he loved mornings, but because work demanded it. The land did not wait for feelings or dreams. It waited for hands that could work and a heart that could stay strong. He had both, even if no one ever praised him for it. People in the nearby town knew him by sight. They saw him ride into town once or twice a week to buy supplies or sell what he spoke little, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had learned that silence kept him safe. When he was younger, words had often brought laughter, not the good kind, but the kind that left a mark. Inside, he lived alone in a small house near the ranch. It was not lonely in his eyes. It was peaceful. The walls carried the smell of wood and dust. The nights were filled with sounds of insects and distant animals. Sometimes when the wind passed through the fields, it felt like the land itself was speaking to him. He listened, even if he never answered back. In the town there were groups of people who passed time by, talking about others. Some talked out of boredom, some talked out of jealousy. Some talked because it made them feel less small. The ranchero became one of their easy topics. He was quiet, he worked alone, he did not defend himself. That made him an easy target. One afternoon, a group was sitting outside a small place where people gathered after work. They laughed loudly and shared stories. Some of those stories were not kind. When the ranchero passed by to tie his horse, someone made a comment about how he would never notice if someone played a trick on him. Another person laughed and said it would be funny to see him believe something good could happen to him. What started as careless words slowly turned into an idea. It's an idea that should have been stopped early, but was not. They convinced themselves it was harmless. Just a joke. They said no one would really get hurt, they said. They did not think about what hope feels like to someone who rarely has. A top plan was made without much effort. They chose someone who could talk easily and smile without trying, someone who others trusted. The idea was simple: pretend to show interest, pretend to care, pretend to see the ranchero as someone special. The goal was laughter, and nothing more. The next time the ranchero came into town, he noticed something different. A smile directed at him, a greeting that felt warmer than usual. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He looked behind him to see if the greeting was meant for someone else, but it was no. Answered quietly, unsure of himself. His voice felt rough from years of silence. The other person continued the conversation, asking simple questions about his day, about the ranch, about the land. No one had asked him those things in a long time, not with real attention at least. He went home that evening, confused. He told himself not to think about it. He focused on feeding the animals and fixing a broken fence. Yet the memory of that smile stayed with him longer than he expected. The following days brought more of the same small talks, gentle interest. Shared moments that felt too personal to be fake. At least that is what he believed. He did not know others were watching from a distance, amused by how icily he reacted. At night, he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why someone would suddenly care. He tried to find reasons that made sense. Maybe people changed. Maybe he had been wrong about the world being unkind all the time. He allowed himself that thought, even though it scared him. He remembered moments from his past when he had trusted to isolate. Those memories usually ended in disappointment. He promised himself long ago that he would never fall into that trap again. Yet something about this felt different, or at least he wanted it to be. As days passed, he began to notice changes in himself. He woke up with more energy. His work felt lighter, even though nothing about it had changed. The land looked the same, yet somehow felt brighter. He started fixing things around the house he had ignored for years, not because they were broken, but because he wanted things to look better. The people behind the joke noticed these changes too. They laughed about it quietly among themselves. They said it proved their point that he was easy to fool, that he was desperate for attention. None of them paused to think about what they were creating. One evening, the ranchero stayed longer in town than usual, sitting on a bench listening rather than speaking. He felt included, even if he did not fully understand how. He watched people pass by and for the first time did not feel invisible. When he returned home, the night air felt different. He stood outside for a while looking at the stars, the same stars he had seen every night of his life. Yet this time they felt closer, like witnesses to something new beginning. Inside him, he did not know it yet, but this was the start of something that would change him forever. Not just because of what he would gain, but because of what he would lose along the way. That Night, he slept deeply unaware that what felt like kindness was built on laughter that did not include him. He dreamed of simple things, shared meals, shared silence, shared days that did not feel heavy. He smiled in his sleep, something he had not done in years, and somewhere else people laughed at the success of their plan, never realizing that what they called a joke was slowly becoming something far more serious than they ever intended. Days turned into weeks, and the ranchero found himself thinking about the small moments in town more often than he expected. Each visit brought a little warmth and a little hope. Started to wake up earlier than usual, not because the work demanded it, but because he wanted to see if someone would be there to talk to him. He felt strange feelings he had not felt in years, feelings that made his chest lighter and his steps slower in a good way. He began to notice details he had ignored before. The way the sunlight hit the market in the morning, the way the wind played with the dry grass along the roads, the way small smiles could change a whole day, even if they lasted only a few seconds. He felt the world differently, and he did not know why. The person who had started the joke noticed how easily the ranchero responded. They were surprised themselves by how much attention he gave to small gestures. They had not expected that he would begin to trust without question, or that he would share parts of himself so openly. They watched quietly, wondering if they had gone too far or if it was just harmless fun. Meanwhile, the ranchero started sharing pieces of his life that he had kept hidden for years. He talked about the struggles of tending the land alone, the nights he spent worrying about the animals when storms came, the loneliness that sometimes pressed on him like a heavy blanket. He did not realize he was speaking to someone who had only pretended to listen. He described small dreams that seemed too fragile to tell anyone. He wanted a friend who understood his quiet life. He wanted a companion who could sit in silence and not judge him. He wanted laughter that did not feel sharp or cutting. He hoped for these things, but never truly believed they could come to him. The person listening began to feel something new, something they had not expected. The ranchero was changing because of them, and at the same time they were changing too. They had started with a joke, but now they felt a strange pull toward honesty. Not the kind that makes a person confess everything at once, but the kind that grows slowly as they realize their own heart is involved. Every time they met the ranchero, small talks became longer. They asked about his routines, about the land, about the animals. They smiled more genuinely and listened more closely, even if they tried not to. They started caring about how he felt, and if he was happy. They noticed when he was tired and when he seemed lonely. They began to worry secretly when he did not appear in town as usual. The ranchero noticed these subtle changes. Too, he felt welcomed and understood in ways he never imagined. He did not know why someone would take interest in his life for no reason. He assumed that kindness existed, but only rarely. He had been hurt before when he trusted too quickly, but this felt different. He let himself hope and hoped without realizing how much he had opened his heart. At the ranch, the days felt lighter. The animals seemed to respond to his improved mood. The chores were the same, but his hands moved more easily. His mind was calmer, yet full of strange excitement. He even found himself singing softly to pass the time, something he had not done in many years. He started thinking about the future in small ways, not grand plans, but small improvements. He fixed fences he had ignored for months. He cleaned corners of his home that had gathered dust. He planted flowers along the porch, not because they were necessary, but because he wanted them to exist for someone to see and appreciate. He began to tell stories about the land and the town that he had never shared before. He spoke about his childhood the first time he rode a horse, the first time he worked in the fields. His voice grew steadier as he realized that someone was truly listening. He felt proud for the first time in a long time. The person behind the joke struggled with a new emotion. They did not expect to feel protective. They did not expect to care when he stumbled on a word or when he seemed tired. They began to question the laughter and the teasing that had brought them together. They wondered if it was too late to change the direction of the joke, or if they should let it continue for fear of showing real feelings. Sometimes they caught themselves staring longer than necessary, watching the ranchero work or smile at a small thing. They felt a pang in their chest, a feeling they could not name at first, but slowly they realized it was something familiar and frightening, something that felt like love, though they could not admit it even to themselves. Ranchero continued to grow in ways unnoticed by most. People in town began to notice a small brightness around him, a quiet confidence that did not demand attention, but quietly existed. The work seemed easier for him, not because he was stronger, but because he was happier, and for the first time. He allowed himself to feel joy without questioning. He had began to imagine future conversations, imagining what it would be like to spend more time with this person, to share meals and quiet evenings. He allowed himself to imagine someone walking beside him in the fields, not as a visitor, but as a companion. Someone who would notice the small details of his life and care for them without asking for anything in return. Anything in return. 8 evenings became a time of reflection. He would sit by the porch, looking at the horizon, thinking about the town, the work, and the person who had entered his life. He felt the strange combination of hope and fear, hope that someone could care so much and fear that it might not last. He did not know about the joke and had no idea of the laughter waiting in the wings. Small letters and messages began to appear. His hands trembled slightly as he read them. He felt the weight of words that were meant to amuse, yet somehow comforted him. He began writing back in his mind, even if he did not send anything. Felt a dialogue forming that existed between silence and careful words. The pranksters outside were unaware of the depth of change. They saw the ranchero smiling more often and assumed it was their success. They laughed quietly, thinking it confirmed how easily he was fooled. They did not see the nights he lay awake thinking about small gestures. They did not hear the quiet words he spoke to himself about hope. They did not realize that what started as a joke was becoming something real and fragile and beautiful. In the fields he worked longer each day, not because the work demanded it, but because he felt alive in a way he had not felt for years. The sun warmed his back, the wind played with his hair, and he imagined sharing these moments with someone who saw him for who he truly was. He imagined their laughter. Without realizing it had begun to enter his life naturally. He did not yet know the truth behind the gestures. He did not know the joke that waited to shatter the small trust he had built, but he felt it was worth the risk. He felt alive for the first time in years, and he allowed himself to enjoy it fully. Even the animals seemed to notice the change. They moved with a lightness, as if they too could sense the joy growing around the ranchero. He began talking to them more gently and paying attention to their needs in a way he never had before. The land seemed to breathe with him in harmony, and he felt a connection deeper than before. As nights passed, he dreamed vividly, not of grand adventures, but of small shared moments. He dreamed of sitting together in silence, sharing a meal. He dreamed of walking along the fields with someone, noticing the same small things he noticed. He dreamed of laughter that did not hurt and care that did not demand, unaware of the joke still waiting in the shadows. He let himself hope. He let himself imagine that someone could genuinely see him, that someone could genuinely care. He felt warmth that had been missing for years, felt lightness that made his steps easier and his heart softer. The weeks continued, with small meetings in town, gentle words, smiles, and attention that felt real. The ranchero began to believe in the possibility of kindness and companionship. He began to trust without knowing that the foundation was built on laughter rather than truth. He did not yet know the pain that would come, but he savored the beauty that existed in the moment and allowed himself to feel alive and cherished in ways he never thought possible. One morning, the ranchero arrived in town, noticing a subtle change in the atmosphere. The streets seemed busier, but his attention was drawn to the familiar face who had always greeted him warmly. He smiled as usual, but something in the other person's expression seemed different. Slight hesitation, or maybe guilt. He did not understand it and did not question it immediately. They began talking as they did every day. The words were simple, about chores and market prices, about weather and animals. The ranchero felt the warmth and care he had grown used to, but now there was a tension in the air that made his chest tighten. He could not place it yet, but he felt a flicker of unease later. That day he heard whispers in town about a joke, a trick played on him. He tried to ignore it at first, thinking people often said things without knowing the truth, but the more he heard, the more he realized that perhaps the kindness and attention he had received was not as genuine as he had believed. He confronted the person who had always smiled at him. They looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Their voice was quiet as they admitted the joke. It started it to amuse others, to see if he would fall for the attention. They spoke without excuses, only a quiet confession of what had happened. The ranchero felt a storm inside him. Humiliation, anger, and pain mixed together. His trust had been broken. He wanted to speak, but no words came out. He wanted to leave, but his legs felt heavy. He had allowed himself to hope, and now that hope seemed like a betrayal. To himself, days passed, and he avoided the town. He stayed on the ranch, focusing on work that felt endless and heavy. He mended fences he had already fixed. He had cleaned the house he had already cleaned, yet the land did not feel alive. He did not feel alive. He replayed the words of the confession over and over, questioning how he could have been so blind. The nights were the hardest. He lay awake, thinking of all the moments he had cherished, thinking of all the words he had believed to be genuine. He wondered if he had ever truly mattered to anyone. He felt the weight of loneliness more heavily than ever before.
Oh.
The silence of the house pressed against him. Meanwhile, the person who confessed struggled with their own feelings they had not expected. The depth of pain they caused. They had started with a joke, but now they felt guilt, heavy and real. He wanted to make amends, but did not know if it was possible or if the ranchero would even listen. They remembered the small moments of joy they had shared and felt regret piercing their heart. The ranchero began to isolate himself further, not out of anger toward the person specifically, but out of fear that any trust could be betrayed again. He worked tirelessly to distract himself from the emptiness that had settled in his chest. The animals and land provided company, but it was not enough to fill the void. He replayed the gestures and words he had once found comforting, now tainted by knowledge of the joke. He questioned everything. He had felt whether smiles were real, whether attention was genuine. He felt foolish, yet he could not help remembering how alive he had felt when he believed in the kindness. In quiet moments he allowed himself to look at the horizon. He remembered the evenings of dreaming and small imagined conversations. He remembered the feelings of hope and warmth. They did not want to erase them completely, yet they caused pain. They reminded him of vulnerability and trust, betrayed. The confessor tried in subtle ways to show sincerity. They did not push or demand forgiveness. They worked quietly to demonstrate that their feelings had changed from mockery to care. They tended animals in the fields. Without saying a word, they left small gestures of help that went unnoticed at first. They wanted to prove that some truth existed in what they felt. Now the ranchero noticed these gestures slowly. He did not understand them fully at first. He resisted interpreting them as genuine. He wanted to protect his heart. He had been wounded deeply and did not wish to be hurt again. Yet each day he felt a flicker of doubt, flicker of curiosity, flicker of something he could not name. He remembered nights when he had felt alone and wondered if trust could exist in a world that had played a cruel joke on him. He questioned the nature of people, their intentions, and the value of kindness. He wanted to build walls around himself to prevent further pain, yet part of him resisted wanting the warmth he had felt before. In the days that followed, he returned occasionally to town for necessities. He observed the interactions and the small gestures with suspicion. He listened carefully to words and actions, trying to read sincerity, yet also expecting deception. He felt weary from the effort, yet could not help hoping for something real. The person who had confessed grew more patient. They realized that healing could not be rushed, that trust had to be earned anew and not demanded. They focused on small, consistent actions, not words. They remembered how the ranchero had felt alive and tried to recreate honesty in every gesture, hoping that time might soften the hurt evenings. The ranch became a time of reflection. The ranchero considered the complexity of human emotions, the contrast between hope and betrayal, the fragility of trust, the quiet power of genuine care. He recognized his own feelings had been manipulated, yet he also remembered the joy he had felt and wondered if he could ever reach that place again. He began writing quietly in a small notebook, not for anyone to read, but for himself. He documented thoughts and feelings, memories and fears, hopes and regrets. The words allowed him to confront pain without spreading it. To others, they became a small refuge where honesty existed unchallenged. The confessor watched from a distance, giving space yet remaining present in silent ways. They understood that every action mattered more than every word. That rebuilding trust required patience and authenticity. They had to demonstrate care consistently. Without expecting immediate return, they began learning humility and the weight of responsibility for someone else's heart. Weeks passed with tension and cautious distance. The ranchero continued his work. The confessor continued their efforts. Both lived with the awareness that the past could not be erased, but that the future could still hold something if patience prevailed. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, a delicate balance between mistrust and possibility. He found himself occasionally remembering the moments before the truth came out, the small smile, the gentle words, the warmth he had felt. He acknowledged the pain, but also acknowledged the beauty of those moments, and realized that even if it was a joke, it had awakened something. Inside him, a sense of feeling alive and capable of hope. Confessor did not interfere with these reflections. They waited silently, respecting the space the ranchero needed. They hoped that one day he would recognize that their feelings had changed. That sincerity had replaced mockery, and that love might emerge from the pain once he allowed himself to open his heart again. In the quiet of the nights, the ranchero began to notice small signs of honesty, gestures that could not be ignored despite skepticism. He saw care in the actions more than words. He saw consistency in presence and effort. He felt confusion, yet also a flicker of something familiar. Hope that perhaps the world could still hold genuine kindness. He did not know when the shift would occur. He did not know if trust could be rebuilt, or if love could exist after betrayal. Yet the land remained constant, the animals remained loyal, and the small acts of care continued to bridge the distance, one quiet step at a time. The ranchero and the confessor existed in parallel, a careful dance of distance and attention. Pain had entered fully, yet the possibility of healing lingered in the air. Both learned slowly that emotions were not simple, that trust once broken demanded patience, that love required authenticity and respect. They were both changed forever by the events that began as a cruel joke and now threatened to become something real and unanticipated. Time moved slowly on the ranch. The ranchero continued with his daily work, but the weight of the past weeks pressed heavily on him. He noticed how his heart flinched at small gestures that once would have brought joy. He remained cautious about every interaction and every smile, yet even in caution, he could not completely close himself off from the world. The confessor continued to show care in small, quiet ways. They fed the animals when the ranchero was busy. They brought small tools or repairs needed for the land. They asked about the work with genuine interest without expecting praise or acknowledgement. They understood that rebuilding trust would take time and that consistent actions mattered more than words. One morning, the ranchero found a basket of fresh vegetables on his porch. He looked around expecting to see a prank, but no one was there. Only a small note saying that the land looked healthy and cared for. The words were simple and honest. He felt a strange warmth mixed with caution. He knew this gesture was different from the past, yet he did not fully trust it. Yet days passed, and the confessor did not demand forgiveness. They remained present, yet invisible in ways that allowed the ranchero to observe and decide for himself. They remembered how quickly trust had been broken, and that pushing too hard could ruin the possibility of future connection. They were learning patience and humility in a way they had never experienced before then. Ranchero began noticing small changes within himself. He found that he could work longer without feeling burdened. He started listening to the sounds of the land more carefully, enjoying the wind and the rustle of trees. He remembered the small moments of happiness from the weeks before the revelation of the joke, and he allowed himself to feel a gentle hope that perhaps not all gestures were deceitful. Evenings became moments of quiet reflection. The ranchero would sit on the porch looking at the horizon, thinking of the past, the present, and the unknown future. He considered how easily the heart could be hurt, yet how fragile happiness could grow from careful actions. He wondered if he could allow himself to trust again, if the past pain would fade slowly into memory. The confessor observed from a distance, noting the subtle shifts in the ranchero's demeanor. They did not speak immediately. They continued small acts of service and presence, letting the ranchero witness sincerity through actions rather than words. They understood that rebuilding trust required consistent effort and a demonstration of authenticity in every interaction. The ranchero noticed when the confessor went out of their way without asking for thanks or recognition. He began to observe their actions more closely and realized that some gestures carried genuine care and not mockery. He felt a mix of relief and fear, relief that not everything was false, and fear that hope could once again be fragile one. Afternoon, the ranchero decided to speak about small things, not expecting deep conversation, but simply acknowledging presence. They thanked the confessor quietly for a repair that had been made on the barn. He felt the words tremble as he spoke, yet he felt an odd relief in admitting acknowledgement without being overly exposed. The confessor nodded simply and smiled gently. They did not reply with words of apology or explanation. They knew that trust could not be built with speech alone, but with repeated demonstrations of care. They waited patiently, understanding that the ranchero needed to observe before accepting. As weeks passed, the ranchero began allowing himself small moments of relaxation and enjoyment. He walked through the fields, observing the animals and the plants. Noticing their growth, he began to feel a quiet satisfaction in tending the land and seeing life continue even after the storm of emotions that had recently passed. The confessor joined in small tasks, occasionally not to show presence, but to assist and make work lighter. They laughed quietly at the small failures of chores and did not demand anything in return. They allowed the ranchero to see them as a companion rather than a source of mockery. Nights on the ranch became more peaceful. The ranchero lay awake, sometimes thinking about the past weeks, but also about the quiet gestures of sincerity. The pain of betrayal remained, yet it became softer as time passed and as consistent care replaced previous deception. He began to feel that perhaps people could change and that trust could be rebuilt. Slowly, he began sharing small details about his days, the growth of crops, the behavior of animals, the weather patterns. He did not speak of personal feelings or fears, but allowed the confessor to see life through his eyes. He realized that communication could exist without words of affection, yet still carry meaning and connection. Confessor listened quietly, absorbing every detail without interruption. They learned to enjoy being present without controlling outcomes. They recognized that healing required space and patience, and that love built on sincerity could not be rushed. They began feeling genuine respect and admiration for the ranchero's resilience and quiet strength. Ranchero began to notice the consistency in gestures that could not be accidental, the tools left where they were needed, the baskets of food, the quiet presence during work. These signs became small foundations for cautious trust. He began to consider that not every action was a test or a joke, but could reflect genuine care and attention and quiet reflection. The ranchero considered the nature of human relationships, the balance between vulnerability and protection, the importance of patience and observation. He began to see that allowing himself to witness sincerity did not require abandoning caution, could instead prepare him for deeper understanding. Even the animals seemed to respond to the change in the ranchero's demeanor. They moved more calmly and closely to him. He noticed this and felt a small reassurance that life and care existed consistently around him. The land itself seemed to reward attention and patience, providing a quiet echo of the lessons he was learning about trust. The confessor continued actions without expectation. They repaired what was broken without demand. They tended to tasks that made the ranchero's work easier. They remained patient when gratitude was sparse or cautious. They were learning that true care did not seek recognition but existed in consistency and honesty. The ranchero began walking through the fields, noticing the smallest signs of growth and health. He considered how life required both work and observation, patience and consistency. He thought about the confessor's presence and how it had changed from mockery to careful attention, and he felt a cautious hope that perhaps trust could be rebuilt. Gradually, small conversations began to emerge. They spoke about work routines, weather patterns, and local events, not about feelings yet. These interactions carried an unspoken connection. They laughed quietly at minor mishaps and shared moments of lightheartedness. Without needing to explain or justify themselves, evenings became times for quiet companionship. The ranchero and the confessor worked side by side or sat in silence, observing the land and the sky. The shared moments did not demand emotion, but provided a subtle reassurance that presence and attention could carry meaning without words or declarations, they began to sense that connection could exist in shared tasks and quiet observation. The ranchero noticed subtle changes in his heart. He felt lighter, yet still cautious. He allowed himself to smile more freely, yet did not abandon vigilance. He recognized that past pain could coexist with present hope, and that trust required time to grow and heal. He began to feel that perhaps genuine connection was possible. Even after betrayal, the confessor continued consistent care. They left small gifts without explanation. They offered help without expectation. They remained patient through quiet days and cautious observation. They were learning humility and the weight of responsibility for someone else's trust and heart. As time moved on, the ranchero began to consider the possibility of allowing deeper trust. The past remained a cautionary tale, yet it also reminded him of the beauty he had once felt when hope was allowed to bloom. He began imagining small steps toward connection, grounded in consistency and honesty. Land continued to flourish, the animals continued to respond, and the quiet acts of care persisted each day, built upon the last, forming a foundation for trust that had been fractured yet could still hold. The ranchero recognized that patience, consistency, and authenticity were the keys to healing, and he felt a cautious optimism that one day connection could be fully restored. Days on the ranch grew warmer, and the sun touched the fields with a gentle light. The ranchero continued his work as he always had, yet the air felt different. Filled with quiet anticipation and careful observation, he had learned to move slowly, not only in chores but in his heart. Allowing space for trust to grow once more, the confessor remained present, yet unobtrusive. Their actions were consistent and sincere. They repaired fences without being asked. They left baskets of food without announcement. They tended to the animals quietly and efficiently. They knew that true care needed time to be recognized, and that love required patience as much as honesty. The ranchero began noticing small shifts within himself. He smiled without fear in the mornings. He listened to the sounds of the land and felt connected. He began speaking in small ways about the days passing, about minor events, about the growth of plants and animals. He did not speak of deep emotions, yet he allowed himself to feel small joys and subtle warmth from shared presence. The confessor noticed these changes and felt a cautious relief. They understood that trust could not be rushed, that every gesture counted, and that patience mattered more than words. They began to feel admiration and respect growing for the ranchero, not from expectation, but from genuine observation of strength, resilience, and quiet dignity. One afternoon, the ranchero found a small bench placed near the old oak tree. The confessor had carried it and positioned it so he could rest and observe the fields. He looked at the bench, hesitated, and then sat, letting the warmth of the sun touch his back. He noticed the care in the placement, and for the first time did not wonder if it was a trick. He felt gratitude and acknowledged it quietly in his heart. Days turned into weeks, and the interactions between them remained steady yet gentle. No rush, no declarations, simply consistent presence and mutual observation. The ranchero began to feel that connection could exist without grand gestures, that love and trust could be built slowly, one sincere action at a time. He started walking through the fields with the confessor beside him, not speaking much, but observing the animals, the plants, the wind as it moved through the grass. They shared silence without pressure, and slowly the ranchero felt comfort in that presence. He realized that companionship did not require constant conversation, but could be built in shared moments and mutual respect. Confessor noticed how the ranchero allowed himself to be present in ways that he had not before. They saw his attention to small details, his care for the animals, the way he moved across the land. They admired his patience and dedication. They understood that the true beauty of connection was emerging quietly and naturally from consistent actions. Rather than words of naments, became moments of reflection and quiet companionship. The ranchero would sit on the porch, the confessor nearby. Sometimes they spoke about minor things, sometimes they remained silent, yet the presence itself carried meaning. He felt his heart lighten, knowing that patience and sincerity could overcome past hurt and that genuine care could grow without forcing itself. Ranchero began to trust more fully, yet still cautiously. He shared small stories from the past, the experiences he had with the land, the lessons learned over years of work. He did not reveal all his heart at once, but he allowed fragments of himself to be seen. So the confessor listened without judgment or expectation, simply observing and responding with care. Nights were spent watching the stars, the quiet hum of the ranch carrying a gentle rhythm. He began to feel a sense of belonging not only to the land, but to someone who had learned to care genuinely. He realized that the past joke had caused pain, yet it also had awakened a deeper capacity for hope and connection that he had nearly forgotten. The confessor continued their actions with patience and respect. They did not demand attention or praise. They offered help where it was needed and allowed the ranchero to lead in ways that honored his strength and independence. They learned that love required both humility and courage, and that sincerity could heal wounds over time. One day the ranchero allowed himself to speak about his dreams. Small as they were, he talked about improving the land, planting more crops, caring for the animals, ensuring the fields flourished. He shared the hope that someday the ranch would be a place not only of work, but of quiet happiness. The confessor listened and offered small suggestions, not to correct but to contribute and share the journey. He began to notice that his laughter returned in small ways. A chuckle at a playful animal, a smile at the growth of a plant, a quiet appreciation of a gesture from the confessor. He realized that the heart could open slowly and safely, that love could grow not from perfection but from consistent care and attention. The confessor felt joy in witnessing this transformation. They had begun with a joke, but through patience, sincerity, and respect they had become a source of healing and companionship. They understood that love was not instant nor easy, but built in quiet moments and consistent acts that demonstrated care beyond words. The ranchero began to anticipate shared moments, not with anxiety but with gentle excitement. He looked forward to evenings observing the land. Together, two small conversations about daily events and two shared silence that spoke volumes without uttering words. He realized that trust had returned, and love had begun to take root in ways both subtle and profound. Days and weeks continued with this rhythm. The ranchero worked the land, the confessor assisted and supported quietly. They shared moments of observation, reflection, and mutual respect. Each day added small layers of trust. Each gesture built foundations of connection that had once been broken, but now began to hold firmly. The ranchero began to feel that love could exist without fear, without pretense, and without haste. He realized that the past could not be erased, but it could inform the future, guiding careful choices and genuine acts of care. He felt his heart open in a way that allowed both protection and vulnerability to coexist. The confessor continued to demonstrate patience, humility, and care. They did not rush declarations. They offered presence and attention as proof of changed intentions. They celebrated small moments, quietly understanding that love was demonstrated over time and through consistent authenticity. Morning, the ranchero walked through the fields, noticing the sunlight playing on the crops, the gentle breeze moving the grass, and the steady presence of the confessor beside him. He felt a calm in his heart, a reassurance that connection could be real and enduring, and that love could grow from sincerity and consistent care. They paused under the old oak tree, reflecting on the journey from pain to trust, from hurt to healing, from a joke to something real and profound. The ranchero felt gratitude for the patience and care that had been shown, and for his own ability to open his heart once more. He realized that true love was not always immediate, but could emerge slowly from understanding, respect, and genuine connection. The confessor felt relief and joy witnessing the ranchero embrace hope and trust again. They understood that the journey from a cruel joke to real love had required patience, honesty, and humility. They recognized that the depth of connection they now shared was built on sincerity and consistent care rather than immediate emotion. Evening fell on the ranch with a gentle quiet. The fields reflected the soft light. The animals settled into calm routines, and the two of them shared moments of reflection, observation. In quiet companionship, the ranchero felt his heart full, yet steady, aware of the fragility and strength of trust and love that had grown slowly and deliberately he realized that the past joke had been painful, yet it had set the stage for profound growth and understanding. He recognized that love could emerge from unexpected beginnings if honesty, patience, and sincerity guided each action. He felt that trust rebuilt carefully could sustain a bond that was deeper and more meaningful than before. The confessor remained present with humility and patience. They continued their consistent actions, demonstrating care and authenticity. They knew that love required respect and attention, and that trust must be nurtured over time. They celebrated the quiet moments and understood that connection was more profound when allowed to grow naturally. The ranchero and the confessor continued their lives together on the ranch. Sharing work, observation, reflection, and small joys, their bond strengthened through patience, sincerity, and respect. They understood that love could exist beyond mistakes and betrayal, and that it could grow stronger through consistent care and mutual understanding. The land thrived as the animals responded. The quiet routines became moments of shared joy and connection. The ranchero felt alive in ways he had not experienced. For years, he realized that the journey from a cruel joke to real love had transformed not only his heart, but the lives around him, showing that sincere actions, patience, and respect could turn even pain into a foundation for deep and lasting. Passed on the ranch, and life settled into a rhythm that felt natural and gentle. The ranchero woke each morning to the sound of birds and the movement of animals. He worked with steady hands and a calm heart. He noticed the land responding to care and attention in ways that reminded him that patience and consistency brought rewards beyond effort. Confessor continued to work alongside him quietly. Their presence was steady and supportive, not intrusive or demanding. They carried out small tasks with attention to detail. They repaired what was needed, brought supplies, and tended to the animals with care. They understood that true love required humility and consistent effort rather than sudden gestures or declarations. The ranchero found himself opening up in small ways, sharing stories of the past, the history of the land, the way seasons changed and affected the crops. He spoke about struggles and triumphs in a calm voice. He felt the safety to share without fear because he had witnessed sincerity through actions rather than empty words. They began spending time together in the quiet moments of the day, observing the movement of the sun, the growth of the plants, the behavior of animals. They walked through fields side by side, not always speaking, yet feeling connected in the shared rhythm of work and observation. The ranchero felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. Small gestures of care continued to deepen the connection. A basket of fresh fruits left on the porch, a repaired fence that had been damaged in a storm, a warm blanket left near the barn for chilly mornings. Each action was a testament to patience and authenticity, and the ranchero began to trust fully because these gestures were consistent and unselfish. Evenings became a time of reflection and quiet companionship. They watched the sun dip below the horizon, listened to the wind in the trees and the subtle sounds of animals. Settling down, the ranchero realized that happiness could be found in simple moments, in shared presence, and in the feeling of being seen and understood without judgment or expectation. The confessor observed the ranchero with quiet admiration. They had started with a joke, but now their heart had changed completely. They recognized the depth of his character, his strength, resilience, and the quiet way he embraced life. They had learned humility and the importance of proving sincerity through consistent care, rather than words alone over time. The ranchero noticed a change within himself. He laughed freely at the antics of the animals. He smiled at the beauty of the fields, felt joy in the work he once considered burdensome. He realized that past hurt could coexist with present happiness, and that love required patience, courage, and honesty to flourish. The confessor felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that their actions had helped to restore trust and foster genuine connection. They understood that love was not something forced, but something grown slowly through care, attention, and consistent presence. They continued to act with thoughtfulness, respecting the ranchero's pace and comfort. The ranchero began to imagine a future where companionship was steady and reliable, not grand gestures or fleeting moments, but a life built on trust, shared work, and mutual respect. He considered how much had changed since the cruel joke and realized that even the pain had contributed to understanding the value of sincerity and patience. They spent afternoons tending the crops together, talking about planting schedules, weather changes, and animal care. They laughed softly at minor mishaps and enjoyed the rhythm of shared work. They did not feel the need to rush intimacy or force declarations. Instead, they let connection grow naturally through consistent presence and attention to small details. Nights were spent observing stars in the quiet of the ranch. The ranchero felt a sense of peace that he had not known for years. He realized that trust had been rebuilt and that love could exist even after betrayal, if nurtured with care and honesty. He recognized that the past had shaped them both, yet it did not define the future, though. Confessor continued their quiet demonstrations of care. They left meals and supplies without expectation. They repaired broken tools and fences without announcing their work. They assisted in tending animals and maintaining the land. Their actions spoke louder than words, and the ranchero began to rely on this presence as a constant and comforting force in his life. Gradually, the ranchero began sharing more of himself. Not deep secrets at first, but small details of hopes, plans, and memories he spoke about, dreams of expanding the ranch, planting more crops, and ensuring the animals thrived. He felt secure in revealing these thoughts because he had witnessed genuine care and authenticity consistently demonstrated over time. The confessor listened attentively, offering gentle suggestions and support. They did not dominate conversation or impose their own ideas. Instead, they provided encouragement and presence, allowing the ranchero to lead in matters of life and land. This balance of respect and support strengthened the bond and built a foundation for enduring trust. They began to experience joy in simple, shared activities, walking through fields, observing animal behavior, planting new crops, and tending gardens became moments of quiet celebration. They laughed together softly at small mistakes and shared observations of life on the ranch. They discovered that true connection did not need dramatic displays, but grew in steady rhythms of attention and care. Ranchero felt a profound sense of gratitude for the consistent presence of the confessor. They realized that trust and love could be rebuilt when actions matched intentions. And when patience allowed for healing, they embraced the reality that genuine connection required humility, courage, and repeated demonstrations of sincerity. The confessor also experienced personal growth through consistent care and attention. They learned to prioritize the needs of another and to understand the power of patience and humility. They realized that love was expressed through steady actions rather than grand statements, and that sincerity over time could heal even deep wounds. Ranchero and the confessor began planning small improvements on the ranch together, planting new crops, building small structures, and caring for animals became shared projects that strengthened both trust and companionship. They learned to work in harmony, respecting each other's strengths and supporting weaknesses through understanding and patience. Evenings continued to hold quiet reflection. They shared thoughts about the day, observations about the land and the animals, and sometimes they simply sat together in silence. Appreciating the shared presence, they realized that love could exist in both speech and quiet, and that consistent care was a form of communication, as powerful as any words. The ranchero felt a quiet joy in daily life. He laughed at the playful animals, smiled at the healthy crops, and appreciated the consistent presence of the confessor. He recognized that trust had been restored and that love had grown slowly yet steadily from careful attention and authenticity. The confessor understood that their journey from a cruel joke to genuine love had required patience, humility, and steady action. They continued to act with sincerity, supporting the ranchero in ways both seen and unseen. They celebrated the small victories of connection, trust, and companionship, knowing that love had taken root in enduring ways. The land flourished under their joint care. Animals thrived, crops grew healthy, and the quiet routines of life on the ranch became a testament to patience, trust, and consistent love. The ranchero felt alive in ways he had not for years, appreciating the steady bond that had grown from careful actions and genuine attention. In the quiet of each day, they shared work, observation, reflection, and subtle joy. The ranchero felt a sense of peace, gratitude, and hope. He realized that love could emerge from unexpected beginnings, and that sincerity, patience, and humility could transform past pain into a foundation for enduring trust and deep connection. Confessor continued to offer steady support and consistent presence. They respected the ranchero's pace and autonomy, providing care and attention. Without expectation, they understood that love was demonstrated through repeated sincere actions, and that trust could flourish when nurtured carefully over time. Together, they cultivated a life of connection, work, and quiet companionship. The ranchero felt secure, knowing that trust had been rebuilt and that love had emerged slowly from sincerity and consistent care. They experienced daily life with gratitude, joy, and the understanding that patience, humility, and authenticity were the true foundations of lasting love.